welcome to the new lecture on EU-Russian relations, and today we start a new block of lectures, of 3 lectures, which will discuss energy relations between Russia and the European Union. I do intend to spend quite some time on energy relations, precisely because they are such a big part of EU-Russian relations, and everybody talks about dependence, interdependence, asymmetric dependence, so let's make sense of it. And in order to do that, we will start talking about Russian energy sector, then we will move to the EU's energy sector, and finally we will bring Russia and the European Union together and look at what energy relations between these 2 actors are. So, Russian energy policy, starting with Russian energy, and you see on this slide 2 different diagrams. One diagram is about energy production, and another one is about internal consumption versus export. Yeah? So you see that Russia has quite a lot of oil and natural gas in its energy balance. 30% of its what it produces is formed of natural gas, followed by oil, and then processed oil products, heating, electricity, and coal. And then, of course, Russia exports quite a lot of oil and natural gas, some coal and processed energy goods, and less so electricity, and of course no heating power. Yeah? So Russia is clearly an energy producer, nothing new, but these are 2 diagrams to illustrate this tendency. Secondly, if we speak about world-proven resources and Russian share in it, we will see that Russia has about 6% of oil resources in its territory, global oil resources in its territory, and about 25–26% of global natural gas resources. That's quite a lot. Russia is clearly a more significant player when it comes to natural gas, and less significant in terms of oil, but still very important. The next slide clearly illustrates the interdependence between Russia and the European Union. Everybody talks about Russia's prevalence in energy relations and Russia's ability to blackmail the European Union. But in fact, the European Union is no less dependent on Russia than Russia is, no more dependent on Russia than Russia is dependent on the European Union. And this is the map that tells us why. The map, in fact, depicts oil and gas pipelines. Green stands for oil, red stands for natural gas. And we clearly see that most of these pipelines link Russia with Europe, and very few of them link Russia with Asia. Well, this map is a bit outdated. Some pipelines were constructed in the Asian part as well, but still, most pipelines are directed to Europe, and therefore Russia is as dependent on the European Union as the European Union dependent on Russia. However, there is a fly in the ointment, in the sense that new resources, new oil and gas resources of Russia are located away from the European market in the Asian part, and therefore a new infrastructure has to be created, and that might be infrastructure linking Russia with Asian markets. Yeah? But that's in the distant future. As it stands now, most infrastructure links Russia with Europe. Scenarios of production growth, we see an optimistic and a pessimistic scenarios here for oil and natural gas. There is also a calculation that Russia has sufficient resources of oil for 21 years to come, sufficient resources of natural gas for 80 years to come. I kind of don't like these figures, but they're always nice to cite. I don't like them because 20 years ago we had oil for 20 years to come, now we have oil for 20 years to come, and in 20 years we'll probably have oil for 20 years to come. Because we find new deposits, we can explore with new technologies what we couldn't explore previously, so in that sense there is a natural progression. However, there is definitely a problem with Russia in the sense that there is a relatively low level of extraction of oil and natural gas compared to global standards. So at the end of the day, the rate stands at about 30%, whereas the best Global result is 65%. So in terms of efficiency of exploration, Russia still has a long way to go. In terms of other sources, we see electricity and coal here. We see that Russia will increase its production of electricity, 60%, 62% almost, to be more precise. Comes from thermal stations, 22.5% from nuclear resources, and 15.5% from hydropower facilities. And Russia has optimistic scenarios of growth of coal production. Again, you see it here. Russia exports quite a lot of coal to the European Union. We don't hear that much talk about that, precisely because there is no link between coal and infrastructure, unlike in the case of natural gas. Priorities of the energy strategy to 2030. Well, I clustered these priorities in 3 different groups for the sake of comparison, future comparison with the priorities of the European Union. Firstly, Russia has a priority of stable energy supply, both to the internal market and outside. And stability of supply corresponds to Russia's understanding of energy security. Secondly, Russia talks about the budgetary efficiency of the sector, which is the ratio between what Russia invests in the energy sector and what Russia gets out of it. Modernization of the sector is on the table, as well as creating of stable institutional infrastructure. And lastly, Russia talks about energy efficiency and minimization of the environmental impact. If we conceptualize Russian energy sector, we have to agree that there are 3 sort of like underlying ideas in this regulation. Well, the first one is about domestic supply. The second one is about profitability, and the third one is about using the energy as a political weapon. So let's look at each of them separately. Domestic supply. Russia is definitely a big consumer, a big producer, but it's also a very big consumer. Something that we frequently don't consider, but it's a huge consumer, and therefore Russia is vulnerable to all price hikes and falls. Yeah? And of course, like many consumers, Russians never like when oil prices or gas prices go up. Russia, on top of that, has a very uneasy geography. Remember that it's a big country. Yeah? And energy is not evenly spread in different parts of the country, so it has to be transported from one part to another part. 60% of the population lives in the European part, most of the resources are located in the Asian part of Russia, and therefore they have to be transported. And the transportation distances are huge, whereas the density of population is not necessarily high, which in fact results in the situation when some regions are not very profitable to supply energy to. There's also a peculiar problem linked to the European Union, which is Kaliningrad, which is separated from the mainland of Russia and has to be supplied in different ways. Yeah? And initially, when the separation emerged as an issue, it was quite problematic, but gradually the problem was solved through the construction of different energy facilities in Kaliningrad. Russia is a federation, yeah, a centralized federation, but still a federation, and therefore there is inequality in how much energy resources every region has, and in that sense there is a certain cross-subsidization and cross-assistance among the regions, which is a logical thing for any federation. Now, going to the energy reform. On the left, I put all sectors which have already been reformed with the purpose of introducing competition in them. And then on the right, there are sectors which are only partly reformed. So Russia is frequently accused of having a non-liberalized energy sector. This is not quite true. If you look at this slide, if you look in details, we will see that electricity was fully liberalized in Russia. Electricity is liberalized even more than in the European Union. Oil was liberalized as well, yeah? And liberalization in this sense, in this case, means that that development of oil upstream facilities were separated from the transportation, and then there are also downstream facilities. Yeah? And there is only one company that guarantees transportation and operation of all oil pipelines, whereas there is a competition in the upstream sector, in the development of oil and bringing them to consumers, and in the downstream sector in the actual distribution to final consumers. So oil is liberalized, electricity is liberalized, coal is liberalized, privatized and structured. Now, moving to more problematic issues. Natural gas has been only partly liberalized, in the sense that Gazprom was restructured in such a way that some companies only developed natural gas, some companies transported, and some companies distributed. Well, actually there is only one company that transports it, and then there are several companies that develop and distribute it. However, most of these companies belong to the group of Gazprom. Yeah? There are independent gas producers, but they are only allowed to supply to the domestic market. And if we compare the amount of reserves that they have compared to the amount of the production, we will see a discrepancy, because their reserves reach about 38%, whereas their production is about 16%. So they choose not to produce as much as they could, precisely because of the lack of access to the transportation network and to the fact that they're limited with domestic market. And then nuclear sector is under the control of the state for the security reasons. Rosatom is the key company that operates here. In terms of the domestic supply, we also have to say that Russia is not the most energy efficient country, and this is the diagram which clearly demonstrates it. Yeah? So Russia has a long way to go to improve its energy efficiency, and this is where the European Union can definitely assist Russia. There are several reasons why Russia is not good in energy efficiency. Firstly, of course, resources are readily available, and when they are readily available, there is not much incentive to actually change the situation. Russia is a northern country, with low temperatures. Well, it's kind of a justification, but a semi-justification, because we compare it with Canada or with Finland, where energy efficiency is definitely higher. The size of the country is an issue, and I already mentioned it. It's about huge transportation distances. It's also about a relatively small density of the population, especially in Siberia. Dominance of heavy energy-consuming industries is also an issue, and therefore they are big consumers of the energy. Yeah? And tariffs for electricity and natural gas do not stimulate consumers as much as they could to save energy, although they definitely do stimulate better than they used to previously. Frequently there is no energy efficient equipment in the buildings, and power companies sometimes are accused of poor performance. Yeah? So that's why Russia in fact consumes more energy per unit of GDP than it could have done in theory had it been more energy saving. The second rationale that we have to keep in mind is profit maximization. Yeah? Profit maximization is a very big issue in terms of energy production and energy market in Russia for a number of reasons. Well, first of all, there is an issue of personal interests, of various stakeholders, political stakeholders, economic stakeholders, and we frequently hear various speculations about that. But secondly, and probably more important, energy resources have always been treated as a way to finance the reform of the country. Yeah? And that's coherent with the Russian dominant idea of the state as a key modernizer. So what does Russia do? Russia supports specific companies in the energy sector. That's a type of Russian capitalism. And also, Russia is very uneasy about liberalization. Yeah? Large deposits explored by Russian companies. Yeah, remember the law on foreign investments of 2008, which limited access of foreign companies to oil and gas deposits. Russia insists on reciprocity, which is interpreted at micro level. Yeah, so we allow you to invest in this company, and you allow us to invest in that company. Russia increases prices for Soviet countries which previously enjoyed lower prices, and in that sense, Russia is frequently accused of blackmailing post-Soviet countries with higher prices when regimes are not friendly. But you can always interpret it in the other way, saying that Russia actually uses the window of opportunities when regimes are not friendly to finally increase prices which are relatively low compared to the global standards. Russia requests the stability of demand precisely because it is interested in revenues, precisely because revenues are used to finance the economy. And Russia tries to control pipelines to make sure that the flow of petrodollars, yeah, or gas euros is stable, and therefore allows for a stable and balanced budget. So this is profit maximization. At the same time, Russia is frequently reproached for the fact that energy is also a political weapon. Why is it so? Well, that's mainly presented in various international documents of Russia, and it's linked to Russia's ideas about the global order, yeah, about multipolarity, and about the fact that it can be an energy power, a superpower. Yeah. It's a way to restore the balance that Russia is looking for. Yeah. And Russian energy strategy clearly says that export of energy is the key factor not only for the development of national economy, but also for the enhancement of Russian political and economic position in the world. Yeah? So Russia is fairly blunt about it. How can Russia do that? Yeah, there are several instruments to do that. Well, first of all, Russia demands equality in designing a regulatory regime for energy, be it the Energy Charter Treaty, the G8, or legal convergence. Secondly, Russia cooperates with various producing countries, with OPEC, with producers of natural gas, and well, this is a way to both political and economic stability. Economic meaning stability of prices. Russia tries to make sure that it controls pipelines, yeah, and it tries to bypass the countries that are problematic for various regions. Russia tries to explore energy resources abroad, and it certainly uses energy to influence post-Soviet countries, for example, to lure them into the Eurasian economic integration, Eurasian economic union. So it's clear that Russia does make use of this instrument. There are certainly contradictions in Russian views because you cannot live with profit maximization and political use of energy at the same time. Yeah? So profit maximization and enhancement of the political status, yeah, are not necessarily coherent. Sometimes it's better for profitability to use existing norms as opposed to designing something new, yeah, for the sake of granting equality. But Russia sometimes insists on equality rather than on efficient use of existing instruments. Relations with certain producers, of course, is problematic, yeah, from the point of view of politics and economics. And of course, treatment of neighboring countries is not coherent. Profit maximization itself is sometimes void with contradictions, because profit maximization at micro level does not necessarily mean a stable legal climate at macro level. Foreign direct investments policy for the sake of benefiting Russian companies also leads to underinvestment and to the delay in the exploration of certain fields. Concept of reciprocity at micro level, in fact, challenges the overall legal climate. And of course, when the state is the key modernizer, it challenges private initiative, and it becomes problematic for private investments and for probably better profit maximization. Finally, it is not always easy to distinguish profit maximization from political weapon. Moving further, to the question of who is in charge in the energy sector. And this is a very good question, because actually we have the state, which is a key modernizer and a key rules provider. And don't forget that in terms of the state, we speak about fairly weak institutions and reliance on personalities, about the rule of the president rather than the prime minister in the field of energy, and about some conflicts among the Ministry of Energy on the one hand, Ministry of Economy on the other hand, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Ministry of Finance. So all these bodies are interested in different things. Ministry of Finance is interested in revenues, the Ministry of Natural Resources is interested in environment, Ministry of Energy is definitely interested in production to the extent possible, and the Ministry of Economy is normally liberal, oriented to liberal reforms. But what is also important is that the state is a key shareholder when it comes to Gazprom as the biggest gas company, and when it comes to Rosneft as the biggest oil company. And therefore the state in fact used its power to renationalize some resources, to regain control. And there is a clear contradiction between the state being a key modernizer and the state being a key shareholder, because the state basically writes the rules for itself and then exploits the rules. Then in both oil and gas companies, or sectors, big companies dominate. In the case of the oil sector, auctions are a barrier for the entry of new players. In the case of the gas company, Gazprom transportation monopoly clearly limits access of new gas companies to the gas market. Here you see the diagram of major Russian oil companies, and you see that, well, Rosneft is clearly the biggest players, followed by Lukoil and a number of others. At the same time, you see that we actually have many more oil companies than it's normally presumed. So we do have small companies that operate in the regions or that operate resources that have already been nearly exhausted, fields that have already been nearly exhausted, but they are not major players. Rosneft, Lukoil, Gazprom Neft are probably the biggest oil players. And then you see a diagram of major Russian gas companies by output in 2015. You see Gazprom, which is the biggest player, followed by oil companies, that's yellow. These oil companies, in fact, develop quite a lot of natural gas. Sometimes natural gas accompanies oil. And then Novatek is the biggest independent gas producer. So this is the structure of the energy market of Russia. This is a very brief introduction to how Russian energy sector is structured, to how it is governed. And this gives you a very good impression of what Russia is as an energy player, meeting the European Union. Next time we will look at the European Union and at the EU's energy sector, and for now I will say goodbye and see you next time.